Hello, MCU fans. Today we're going to do some final prep before the upcoming exciting timeline book comes out by recapping all of the MCU movies and shows that appear in the Disney Plus timeline. However, at no further point in this video will I mention the words Disney and/or Plus because I'm not going to rely on that timeline. Instead, I'm going to look at the timeline hints in each of the movies and shows to figure out their placements. So this is kind of my final predictions for where things will lie when the timeline book comes out. So we can see how wrong I was, right, when it comes out. And I promise I'll do videos about it and be very transparent on everywhere I'm wrong. And yes, I do know they've changed the cover to the book, and no longer does the lower right-hand corner have Wanda in it. It's now got Loki. But you know what? I love Wanda. So this is her last appearance there on the cover. Anyway, one other thing of note in this video that I'm sure you'll find interesting is I have moved some of the movies from a timeline placement that I've held on to for, well, at least a year. And I'll go over why. So, I think you'll enjoy this. Without further ado, let's dive right in and see what we can find out. As I mentioned each video, during August, we are running a contest. All you have to do to enter is be a subscriber and leave a comment. The more videos you comment on, the more entries you have. And then in early September, I'll announce the winner drawn at random, and they'll be able to choose from one of these three books. Got to be the timeline book, right? It's a video about timelines. No, any of these three. You can choose one of those three. So good luck to everyone. All right, also, I always like to point out the incredible resource that the Marvel Cinematic Universe wiki is. Also, Drew, who is amazing. But in particular, Drew killed it for this video because the one interesting thing about the wiki is there's so much information. Sometimes you can miss nuggets of wisdom. So I went to the original nugget of wisdom himself, Drew, and he helped me find some of the really important things to point out for this video. So thank you, Drew. You are amazing. All right, it's also worth noting, I do not cover every single thing about the timeline. I'm covering specifically the main movies and main shows. However, that's because I have other videos that cover all these other things. And if I put them all in one video, it would be about 6 hours long. So we don't want that. But when you're done with this video, please feel free to check out any of these other ones. For example, in the upper right-hand corner, we have the Netflix Defenders timeline. Then we have the ABC show timeline. Then we have the Hulu and Freeform timelines. We have the Sony Universe timelines, the X-Men Universe timelines, yes, even the newscast timelines. And then down on the bottom, we have the flashback video, post-credit video, and even one on Fury's Big Week going into how those three movies, Iron Man 2, Thor, and Incredible Hulk, all fit in together. Each of these refers back to this main timeline that I'm talking about here. So, very cool. They all harmonize together. Check them out if you want more information. But this video, again, will be about the main MCU timeline, which, speaking of, starts with Captain America, right? Okay, so what do we know about the placement for Captain America? Well, we know the film begins with the search for the Tesseract, and Marvel gives us a date, right? It's March of 1942. Yes, good way to start. We also get some other dates. We know when Steve enlists in the Army. It's June 14th of 1943. We also know around the time he took the super soldier serum because it's reported in the paper on Wednesday, June 23rd of 1943. Nice. We also learn when Bucky was quote-unquote killed, that it's sometime in 1944. We learn this from the Winter Soldier movie, where when Bucky's looking at everything in the museum, we see this date for his quote-unquote death. Of course, I say quote-unquote death because really he didn't die, right? It was the same mission where they went after Zola to capture him. Bucky fell off the train and into the ice, and they thought he was gone. But was it 1944? Okay, hold on to that thought because in the same movie, Winter Soldier, they give us a different date. So Zola says he was captured in 1945. I may not be the man I was when Captain America took me prisoner in 1945. Well, like I said, that's the same mission where Bucky fell off the train. So what is it? Is it 1944 or 1945? Now, if I were to take a guess, they're probably going to go with 1944 because that's more visible. It's a bad reason, but it is more visible. But this line seems to imply 45. But that's not it. In Civil War, we get the impression that Bucky was still active in 1945 because Cap is trying to decide whether to go and try to rescue Bucky, and he said he'd do it for me. And Falcon says 1945 maybe. Okay, that's a second movie that seems to establish as 1945. So I guess it doesn't matter in the long run, but I kind of hope they go with Bucky, quote unquote, being killed in 1945 because that fits a lot better. Okay, then we know the movie ends with Cap, being frozen in the ice in March of 1945, because notice the newspaper article says March 5th, 1945. But is that actually when he disappeared and went on ice? Okay, I'm just bringing this up because timeline purists would like it to be February of 1945. And you might say, oh my goodness, does it really matter? Well, it does if you look at overall continuity. Now, I'm going to bring up some stuff from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which for the most part, we're not talking about it in the overall timeline. But when it does give hints or clues for the movies, I am going to bring those facts up. And in this case, there is a flashback episode where Reinhardt is captured by Agent Carter. And that flashback happens after Captain America went on the ice. And notice the date for when he was arrested, 3/2/45, March 2nd of 1945. That's actually before the March 5th date, even though it happens after. And then also on the right is a prop, and I know props, right? Can we trust them? But this was released by Marvel, so notice it has February 3rd of 1945. So I don't know which date they're going to go with for officially when he was frozen. I can just say that from a purist standpoint, February would be better. But nonetheless, I think we can officially go with 1942 to 1945 because Marvel released this timeline, which I know is very detailed. Don't worry, I'm going to blow up the parts we need to see. But I just want you to see Marvel released this timeline right around the time of Avengers, and it has everything leading up to Avengers in a nice timeline here. And in particular, they show a 3-year gap, 67 years to 64 years BIM, which I'll get into that in just a second. But there's a 3-year gap between the beginning of Captain America and the end. So Johann Schmidt invades Norway, and then 3 years later, he's captured. Okay, so what is this BIM thing? BIM stands for Before Iron Man, meaning before Tony Stark said, I am Iron Man. Because basically the 0 point that they put in the MCU is when he said that, which I'll buy that. That is the 0 point, right? It's kind of like with Star Wars, there's BBY and ABY, and that's around when the Battle of Yavin is, i.e. The end of A New Hope. So the 0 point for the MCU timeline is when he said, I am Iron Man. And then they're saying it was 67 years and then 64 years, which you can do that math and you get 1942 to 1945. So that works perfectly, right? So I'm going to go with March of 1942 to March of 1945. Again, that's not saying that's when Captain America went on the ice. February is when that probably happened. But the newspaper, at least, was in 1945, March. Okay, woof. What about the prologue and the epilogue, though? Those are in present day. When did those things happen? Well, this is interesting. Remember, I talked about Fury's Big Week, and one of the biggest things on the timeline is it does break out Fury's Big Week, and a lot of big fans of that concept of basically Iron Man 2, Hulk, and Thor all happening together were hoping that Captain America was also found in present day during Fury's Big Week. However, you notice it looks like Captain America is discovered in the Arctic after Fury's Big Week. So when, how far after, that's still a big question, but I just want to point that out. The Marvel is saying, no, cool as that would be, if it was sometime during that week, it's not. It's after that week. All right, so Captain America apparently was frozen for, quote unquote, nearly or almost 70 years, because that's what Fury says. Not real helpful. We want exact, but hey, that works. But we do get an exact number in Homecoming, because Cap says in those little educational videos, take it from a guy who's been frozen for 65 years. Well, keep in mind, Homecoming has some other issues with dates 8 years later. So can we rely on that? It's not perfect, because that would actually put it during Fury's Big Week, by the way. And we'll get to that when we get further down. But nonetheless, there's another date, 65. However, the one that seems the most accurate is actually kind of a behind-the-scene prop, but not really. This was the stuff seen in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which is really cool, right, as they walked through. And, I mean, they made these things. These are actually etched. So you would think that they would get them as accurate as possible. Notice the one called Out of the Ice on the far right, and in particular the lower corner, says, imagine waking up a new century. Now, not only would you be immersed in a world of new technology and machinery, but 66 years of music, movies, and culture. So, 66. The reason I like 66, and the wiki does as well, is if Cap ended in 1945, this puts us in 2011. So it's after Fury's Big Week, we're going to see, but it's before Avengers. Works perfect. So, That's a lot for one movie, right? But so for now, we'll come back to this and talk about it more, but it looks like he was unfrozen in 2011. Okay, I promise there won't be many more as complex as Captain America. A lot going on there. In fact, here's an easy one. Agent Carter. And this is the one shot. Remember, the TV shows are covered in those other videos. But the one shot, very easy to place. First of all, they tell us 1 year later from Captain America, obviously. So that means it's sometime in 1946. And then they make it really clear because there's some paperwork that you can clearly see in the episode that's dated March of 1946. Nice. Easy one, right? March of 1946. All right, then we have Captain Marvel, which I'm connecting to Captain America basically because of the Tesseract. And that's one of the reasons I really like watching stuff in timeline order, because the story of the Tesseract makes so much more sense when you watch it in timeline order. But nonetheless, the Tesseract next appears in Captain Marvel. So when does this happen? Well, they make it really easy on this one too. Over Fury's shoulder there, you can see a calendar saying June of 1995. They hover on it just long enough to make the point that we want you to see it. So yeah, June of 1995. Also, he does tie it even further by saying that the flashback where Carol Danvers was in the explosion with the Tesseract and got her powers and her amnesia was 6 years ago, and he says that is 1989. So perfect. Another easy one. Yes, June of 1995. Okay, what's next? Oh, I should add, Captain Marvel, we're not going to see her again all the way until Infinity War. So this line goes off the page because we'll get to Infinity War eventually. Okay, Iron Man. Let's talk about Iron Man. So, Iron Man connects with Captain America because of Howard Stark, connects with Agent Carter, again because of Howard Stark, but also because of S.H.I.E.L.D., and connects with Captain Marvel because it's the next appearance of Nick Fury. All right, so what do we know about this movie? Well, Iron Man, we learned, was in captivity for 3 months because, he says, I've been in captivity for 3 months. And then soon after he does his press release, or his announcement that they're going to get out of the arms business, there's a Mad Money episode mocking that. And you can see in the upper right-hand corner a date of May 4th of 2008. Okay, great. So if this is in May, 3 months before that would be February, and we know we're in 2008. Yes, been really easy so far, right? Then, if we look back at that timeline, which again I want to stress was released by Marvel, so you have to trust it, right? They're saying there's 9 months between the point of the beginning of the movie and when he says, I am Iron Man. So 9 months, BIM is the beginning of the movie to the end. I'm a little surprised it covers 9 months, and I know not everybody agrees with that, but again, that's what Marvel's telling us. So, okay, I'm going to go with that. Therefore, February to November of 2008. Yes, another easy one, right? Not so fast, because this one's going to get moved around a bit, but nonetheless, that's what it seems like on the surface. Okay, then we have the Incredible Hulk. All right, when does this happen? Well, we know that the opening flashback shows Bruce Banner becoming the Hulk, and that flashback is 5 years ago, because Ross says he made it 5 years and got across borders without making any mistakes. So again, there's a flashback video that goes into all the flashbacks, but I just kind of wanted to point out the beginning of the movie is a flashback to 5 years ago. Okay, when the movie then starts, we get these really cool numbers about days without incident that helps us figure out how long the movie spans. So at the beginning of the movie, he's been 158 days without incident. Then, right before the Bottle Factory battle, when of course he has an incident and becomes the Hulk, it was 190 days without incident. Then it gets reset to 0, obviously, but that means 32 days from the beginning of the movie to the Bottle Factory. Very cool. He then goes 17 days without incident before the battle at Culver University, when, of course, he turns into the Hulk. So there's 17 more days. Then a few more days transpire before the Battle of Harlem. And then after the Battle of Harlem, he goes 31 more days without incident before he goes 0 days because he learns how to control it and shows that, hey, I can become the Hulk on my own. So that's really cool. If you add those three up together, the 32, the 31, and the 17, add a few more days for the time between Culver and the Harlem fight, and you get 83, 84 days. Awesome. So we kind of have that for the length of time of the movie. But when does it happen? Well, we do get a date of March 24th of 2007 for the rules of engagement of how the military is supposed to, engage with Banner. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's when it's happening. It just means that's when the rules were created. But it does mean it's obviously after March 24th of 2007, right? So I guess that's worth something. More importantly, though, is Tony Stark basically shows up at the end and alludes to the Avengers initiative when he says, "What if I told you we're putting together a team?" This is obviously after the end of Iron Man, so that means the end of Incredible Hulk, at least the end, has to be after the end of Iron Man. So just to get something down, and believe me, it's going to move from here, but let's say that the end of the movie is in December, because that would be after the end of Iron Man. And of course, it was about 4 months in length because of what we learned with the Days Without Incident stuff. So September to December of 2008. Okay, great. We got something down. How about Iron Man 2? Okay, what do we learn about it? Well, Iron Man 2 picks up 6 months after Iron Man 1 because literally the beginning of the movie is a flashback to the Venkos, two Venkos there, watching Tony Stark say, "I am Iron Man" on TV. And then they immediately say, 6 months later. So that would seem to imply 6 months from, the flashback to the end of Iron Man to the beginning of Iron Man 2. Some people have debated, well, but it took Venko time to build the Whiplash costume to fight Iron Man. Maybe the 6 months is after he finished the costume, or the outfit, not 6 months after he said, "I'm Iron Man." Okay, I guess. I mean, they're not real clear of exactly when it's 6 months, not yet at least, but they're going to become clear. So we know Iron Man 2 picks up with the Stark Expo, right? And there he is announcing the Expo. Then we very quickly go to him being called before the Senate to get, reamed. And they say, "We all know why we're here. In the last 6 months, Anthony Stark has created a sword of untold possibilities." So first of all, I love Justin Hammer. So glad he's returning. Second of all, this is crystal clear. It has been 6 months since he said, "I'm Iron Man." And they all learned that Stark created that thing. Okay, so this whole question of was it before or after Venko made the costume, what exactly, or outfit, sorry, when did it happen? No, it is clear. 6 months since the end of the movie. Oh, but that's not even all. There's a scene with Justin Hammer talking about Christine Everhart, saying she actually is doing a big spread on me for Vanity Fair. And Pepper Potts jumps in with, well, she did quite a spread on Tony last year. So there really can't be more than 6 months apart between the two movies. They're making that really clear. It was within 6 months. Okay, so still though, so theoretically then that would put us in May, right? Because 6 months after November would be May. But let's see if there's evidence of the May date. I should also mention too, hey, here we are with our timeline again, and Marvel's saying really clearly it's 6 months from the Grand Prix and Whiplash attacking him and the point when he said, I am Iron Man in the previous movie. So it seems really, really clear. It's 6 months. Okay, so here's the key though. We know it's May because that's when the Monaco Grand Prix happens in real life. And Marvel doesn't always use real life dates, but in this case, it seems to make sense because that's 6 months after November. Perfect, it's May. Great. Also, there's an Avengers deleted scene, which, deleted scenes are not technically canon, but this one's so helpful. So I pull from them because it does seem like this is Marvel trying to indicate something, even if it didn't officially make it into canon. And they give his birthday. Tony's birthday is May 29th of 1970. Well, that really works because we know Iron Man 2, he celebrates his birthday, right? So the Monaco Grand Prix is in May, and now they're saying he was born in May and he has a birthday. So this is all perfect, right? And it also said the end of May, May 29th. So it seems to be late in May. All right. Well, that really works, right? So we can say May, and it moves it a little bit into June by the end of the movie. So 2009, because it's 6 months after Iron Man 1. However, we now know a few more things about all this, because in Iron Man 2, we see that there are scenes literally from the Iron Man or from the Incredible Hulk movie. So like he's watching on a monitor the battle at Culver real time. So that means the Incredible Hulk movie is happening simultaneously with Iron Man 2, a la Fury's Big Week, right? So we need to move some things around here then. First of all, that means Iron Man did not appear in the Hulk movie and then Iron Man 2. He appeared in Iron Man 2 and then the Hulk movie in that post-credit scene. Okay, and that also means we need to shift the Incredible Hulk into 2009, overlapping with Iron Man 2. Okay, so we can look at the main part of the Incredible Hulk movie, which was in June, end of May, early June, and that's got to overlap with Iron Man 2. Great. And so it began in April and then moves all the way into July, remember, because 31 days he went without incident before the very end of the movie. Whew, okay. they're retconning this stuff. They're retconning it everywhere. But okay, we're good, right? We're good. All right. However, we're not done yet because the Grand Prix du Monaco Historique is a biannual event on even years. Again, in real life, is it the same in the movie? Who knows? But we have to assume, unless we see something different, that they're using real life stuff. So that means it's on an even year, which means Iron Man 2 has to be on an even year. Oof. Okay, well, I haven't mentioned this yet, but let's bring up the fact that there is a computer screen in Iron Man 2 that shows 2010. Okay, well, that would seem to mean 20, and notice it says May even. It's perfect, right? May of 2010. Okay. Also, there was a promotional website that came out when the movie came out for the Stark Expo, dating it in 2010. I mean, is this canon? I don't know. All I know is Marvel sure thought the movie was happening in 2010. And by the way, it actually came out in 2010 on top of that. So it's really looking good for 2010 right now. Okay, and then notice on that website, it says it opened on May 7th of 2010. Okay, it's all really working pretty good here. Okay, then also the Wakanda Files, which is a really cool book. If you've never checked it out, it's basically Shuri collecting all kinds of information across the entire MCU about technological advances. She's basically learning from what other people have learned from and giving her own opinions on it. It's very cool. But notice there's a page that talks about that hearing, that Senate Armed Services Committee hearing, and they put the date as 2010. Boy, Marvel really seems to think this movie happens in 2010. Okay, great. I have no issue with that. And then also, let's throw in one more little thing. Remember that deleted scene that had this dossier on Stark? Notice that it says, from an employment standpoint, he was the CEO of Stark Industries until what date? 2010. And remember, in Iron Man 2, he makes Pepper Potts become the CEO in 2010. Boy, it's all really fitting. This really seems to be 2010. Then let's go one more step further. The comic tie-in for The Incredible Hulk gives seemingly the date of the flashback of when he became the Hulk. Notice the little calendar there on the right, April of 2005. Now, are these tie-ins canon? I don't know. I really don't know. They intended them to be when they came out. Are they still? I don't know. But I still like looking to them for little hints and clues as to when things are happening. So this sure seems to imply the flashback was in 2005, meaning the movie takes place in 2010. All right, keep an eye on the Hulk and Iron Man 2 because we are now moving them to 2010. So no longer 2009, they've moved to 2010. And probably, so Hulk's been retconned twice now, maybe 3 times. But anyway, I think this makes sense. So we're going to stick with that for now. We'll see if it changes. Okay, here's something interesting. Do we need to drag Iron Man now forward? Well, according to the timeline, which I didn't talk about this aspect of it yet, but let's look at this. When they give this, the beginning and the ending of Captain America, remember they were 3 years apart. Well, if you add 1945 plus 64 BIM, you get 2009. So it seems that even though the Iron Man movie came out in 2008, that when Marvel put out this timeline, they're saying, no, it's really 2009. Okay. Also, in Endgame, this is kind of interesting. The time heist machine, where they were using it to figure out what times to go to, notice one of the times listed is November of 2009. Now, they didn't go back then, but you do have to wonder, why was that even up there? Well, probably because it was an important point in time, which, by the way, that would be when he said, I am Iron Man, if Iron Man took place in 2009. Wild. Okay, great. However, there is one big problem, and it is a big problem. In Civil War, Vision said in the 8 years since Mr. Stark announced himself as Iron Man, and he's referring to, obviously the end of Iron Man 1, Civil War, we haven't got there yet, but it comes out in 2016, believe me. 8 years before would be 2008. So, we have to decide who to trust. Do we trust Vision or do we trust some of those other facts? Well, the biggest thing to consider is we've seen multiple reasons that Iron Man has to be within 6 months of Iron Man 2, right? It was really crystal clear. So I'm sorry, Vision. I'm going to say you got that one wrong somehow. I don't know how Vision got it wrong, but he did. So watch the year for Iron Man. We're going to 2009. No longer 2008. We're going to 2009. Woof. Man, this stuff keeps getting retconned. Okay. What else do we know? Well, we know from Iron Man 2 that Coulson leaves Stark's side to head over to see what's going on in New Mexico, i.e. Thor, and he has that one shot, a funny thing happened on the way to Thor's hammer. So I go over it all in Fury's Big Week in great detail, but we know he leaves Iron Man 2, and he appears then in the Thor movie. So by virtue of all of this, it connects, again, those three movies together, as well as the one shot, during Fury's Big Week. And then finally, we end with the consultant. Now, the consultant is when Sitwell and Coulson are talking about what do they do about Blonsky and that whole mess. And they send Stark to go talk to Ross at the end of Incredible Hulk. Well, we know Incredible Hulk doesn't end until July, so that places this in July. So, oh my goodness, wow, was this ever crazy. Woof. Okay, there you go. Fury's Big Week. Now, again, the timeline that Marvel put out, it goes day and night, fully into detail in this, and that's why I did a separate video harmonizing all of it together. But yeah, Marvel really, really thought this through. It's very cool. I love it. Way to go, Marvel. Okay, what's next? Oh, by the way, yes, let's bring this up. Now that we've placed Fury's Big Week finally, right? We finally placed it. There is a comic called Fury's Big Week. It's really good. You should check it out. And in it, at the very end, they have an epilogue where they say it's 1 year later from Fury's Big Week that Captain America is unfrozen, which actually works perfect because remember a while ago I said 66 years plus 1945 puts us in 2011. Well, guess what? That would be after Fury's Big Week, so we're talking a year later. That's interesting too, by the way, isn't it? A year after Fury's Big Week. But that's what they said. Notice 1 year later in the upper right-hand corner there under epilogue, 1 year later. Okay, so that means Cap was unfrozen from the ice around probably May or June of 2011. Okay, on to Avengers. So, what do we learn about Avengers? Well, this one is much easier to place. So first of all, it has connections with everything, right? Everybody's now showing up. All the Avengers, of course, who no surprise, right? All right, so multiple movies tell us that Avengers is happening in 2012. It has to be one of the most codified things out there because basically the Endgame time heist, Loki, and Hawkeye all give us 2012 as the date. Okay, we get it. It's in 2012. When in 2012? Well, at the beginning of the movie, we actually see a poster behind Loki's shoulder there that says the 4th of May. For this event starting. And this was the grand opening of this museum, so that this would have been 4th of May, right? So pretty much we know May 4th of 2012, that's when Avengers is happening. Wow. They're just making it really crystal clear, aren't they? Great. Also, in Loki, the Loki series, on one of the TemPads, notice in the lower left-hand corner there, May 4th of 2012. Nice. And then also in Endgame, remember I talked about how they had the time device and they're setting it to all these different times? Look at that one, May of 2012. So again, they are making it crystal clear when this movie happens. Also, this fits really well because Avengers seems to be 2 years after Fury's Big Week. Because in it, Natasha, Black Widow, talking to Bruce, says, you've been more than a year without an incident. The key is more than a year. The only way that it's more than a year and also in May is if it's in 2012. It's got to be all the way into 2012. Okay, perfect. Yeah, because see, there you go, right? Avengers is in 2012 to be more than a year from Fury's Big Week and his last incident, which as far as they're concerned is in July. Then, boom, makes sense, right? Everything is working perfectly before it all starts to crumble. Okay, this is when stuff gets tough. All right, so unfortunately we have a line in Avengers that seems to imply that Avengers is only 1 year after Fury's Big Week, because Fury says last year Earth had a visitor from another planet. Last year, and he's referring to Thor's movie. Well, right now it's 2 years away. All right, so there's that, unfortunately. Also in Thor the Dark World, which we haven't placed yet, but trust me, it's in 2013, Darcy says the last time he, Thor, was gone for like 2 years. Well, that would imply 2013 is 2 years after Thor, which we currently have in 2010. Now, she could be referring to when Thor came back for Avengers. That could solve it, because it would be 2 years since then. But seems to imply that we're talking about the first Thor movie. So that's unfortunate. That's 2 things that seems to move Fury's Big Week into 2011. Oof. Then there's also this timeline that was put out, and I want to stress, not by Marvel. This was not officially endorsed by Marvel, but nonetheless, it lists Fury's Big Week in 2011. But also it had all kinds of errors. It had Black Panther in 2017. We're going to get to that. That's completely wrong. And it has Infinity War in 2017, and that's also completely wrong. So this thing was not endorsed by Marvel, but here's my problem. I gave it a lot of credence because I thought it was endorsed by Marvel. So that made me think Fury's Big Week had to be 2011. So you take all of this stuff together, and that is why I moved everything to 2011. So not 2010, but 2011. So this is where I had placed those things. Then how about Iron Man? Okay, because Iron Man needs to move forward, right? It's 6 months earlier. We saw that. Okay, let's look at that. Well, there's this timeline that put it in 2010, which again was not endorsed by Marvel and has other issues, but I gave it too much credit, 2010. But this is interesting. Age of Ultron does have some scenes where he's looking back through historical stuff, and sure enough, there he sees a footage file of the beginning of Iron Man, and it says February of 2010. Now, actually, it shouldn't say February, though, because remember, he was in captivity for 3 months, so it should say more like April or May. Nonetheless, though, 2010 is the key. Okay, and here's another bit of footage from the first Iron Man movie. And again, 2010. Oi. Okay, well, you take all that, and now you move Iron Man to 2010, right? So it's no longer 2009, it's 2010. So for the record, this is where I had Iron Man, Hulk, Iron Man 2, and Thor with these placements. This is where people like Drew are so helpful, because he said, dude, look at all the evidence. Don't just look at a timeline that came out by somebody that wasn't even endorsed by Marvel, and don't look at a 1 or 2 lines. Put it all together. Okay, so let's do that. What is the evidence for Iron Man being in 2010 and Fury's Big Week being in 2011? Well, we have some really quick images from Age of Ultron, one of which even had the wrong month. Yeah, that's true. We do have a really good quote from Fury. Fury's quote is completely wrong if that's not where this is placed. We have Darcy's quote that is certainly more confusing if it's not referring to the first Thor movie. And then we have, of course, the faulty timeline that wasn't endorsed by Marvel. But still, these 4 things, these are the reasons I put Iron Man in 2010 and Fury's Big Week in 2011. But Drew said, how about this? He said, look at all this for why Iron Man should be in 2009 and Fury's Big Week in 2010. We had that image from Endgame. We had the deleted scene, granted, yes, but it showed all the good information about Tony Stark. We have the official timeline from Marvel, not some hokey one that was wrong. We have Scarlet Johansson, who plays Black Widow. We have Black Widow telling Bruce it's been a year since an incident. We have the epilogue for Fury's Big Week being a year later. We have the 2005 date. We have the Monaco Grand Prix having to be in even years. We have the 2010 screenshots actually in Iron Man 2. We have the Expo, and we have the Wakanda files. That is a lot more evidence than this. So we have this, and we have this. Okay, I'm sold. I am sold. It really does need to be 2009 and 2010. Then you have the issues of, well, should Iron Man stay in 2008? Because you have Vision's quote from Civil War. You do have the screenshot, remember, in Iron Man that said 2008. And then one I haven't brought up yet, but good old Homecoming, has Happy Hogan saying, I've been carrying this ring since 2008, which seems to imply that, Tony Stark told him to hold the engagement ring as soon as he started really getting interested in Pepper, which would have been in Iron Man 1. Doesn't have to be, but it could be. Okay, so that's the evidence for Iron Man staying in 2008. However, then you have all the evidence for the fact that it should be 6 months before Iron Man 2. Of course, we have the 6 months later. We have the official timeline from Marvel. We have the quote from the Senate hearing by Justin Hammer. And then we have Pepper's burn on Christine Everhart. This evidence to me is stronger than this evidence. The Vision's quote, that's a hard one. I know, but still, this is pretty hardcore evidence here. So I have now officially revised my dates. Watch as they move. Yep, so not these anymore, but these. So I'm going to go on the record that I looked at the best things I was aware of, but someone helpful like Drew giving you all the facts, I have officially moved Iron Man to 2009 and Fury's Big Week to 2010. I think it fits with the most evidence. My one fear is that in addition to the Vision quote about the 8 years ago thing, I think Kevin Feige really wants Iron Man to take place in 2008. because I think he wants the MCU to have started in 2008. I'm just guessing, but I'm going to bet you the timeline book puts Iron Man in 2008, but leaves Fury's big week in 2010, because that makes more sense. Bottom line, and I'm sorry this has taken so much to explain, but I want you to see how hard this is to place. You can't make it work with everything. You just can't. Someone's going to have to give. Some movie line is going to have to give up, or it won't all work. So I don't know. I'm going to stick with 2009 for Iron Man because I think that makes the most sense, but I'm just going to bet you they're going to go with 2008. Okay, there we go. I swear nothing else is this complex, but I wanted you to see this. It's kind of wild. This is what happens when you retcon over and over again. I'm glad. Many people say, man, Phase 4's timeline is so confusing. Oh, I don't think it's this confusing. I don't think anything is this confusing. Okay, let's move on. So we have item 47, the item 47 one-shot. This is really cool. They make this really clear when it happens. Okay, let's see what we got here. The one-shot is shortly after the Battle of New York. Why do we know that? Because while S.H.I.E.L.D. is summarizing things, they say, Richmond, Virginia, 7 days after the Battle of New York. Greensboro, North Carolina, 2 days after that. Charleston, South Carolina, the following afternoon. And then Savannah, Georgia, yesterday morning, which is then when the one-shot is taking place. So you take all that into account, and it's May of 2012. Yay, something else easy, right? Okay, how about Thor? So when does Thor, the Dark World, happen? Well, it picks up right after Avengers. On the left is the scene from the end of Avengers, and on the right is Loki in chains in Asgard. So the beginning, at least, is immediately following Avengers, so May of 2012. However, then it does make a big jump, because we know from Avengers Endgame, the main part of the movie takes place in 2013. They tell us that, boom, works. But also in the movie, they give us some pretty big hints. There's a calendar that shows 2013. That's really clear. And then even there's the release forms for good old Eric Selvig when he had his little streaking incident. And notice it's 11/14 of 2013. So that's November of 2013. All right. That doesn't get too much easier, right? May of 2012 is when it starts, and then it jumps forward to November of 2013. And that's why, again, the line where Darcy says, it's been 2 years since last time, that pretty much works with Avengers, right? If she's talking about Avengers, it works. So, okay, I'm good with that. I'm good with that. All right, how about Iron Man 3? Okay, Iron Man 3 has a prelude, flashback to New Year's Eve of 1999. Makes that really clear, right? And then it really makes it clear that it's 13 years later that the majority of the movie happens, right? Because several characters say that. Killian says, I invited Tony to join AIM 13 years ago. And later, Tony says, and here you are 13 years later in the dungeon. So, okay, 13 years from 1999, that would be 2012. Okay, great. And then when in 2012? Well, there's so much to tell you it's Christmas. I mean, I could show you image after image, but I think you know, right? If you've seen the movie, you know it's in December. So, December 2012. It seems really easy, right? Well, there's one problem. There is a date, and that date, if you zoom in, although you can probably already read it, but if you zoom in, is December 23rd of 2013. Well, this does codify that it is in December, but we knew that. But it says 2013. Well, that's not really 13 years after effectively December of 1999, because it was right before New Year's in that prelude at the beginning. My fear is that the timeline book is going to look at the dates more than the lines, which is unfortunate. So I fear it's going to end up in 2013, but I'm putting it in 2012. That is when it makes the most sense, narratively speaking. So I'm going with 2012. We'll see what happens. Fingers crossed that they look at the lines and not the dates. Okay. How about All Hail the King's one-shot? There is nothing at all to give us any indication of when this happens other than we know it's after Iron Man 3 and not too long after. So the wiki goes with a year after. There just isn't anything more. I hope the timeline book tells us, but, I'm just going to go with that. Anybody has a different idea, let me know, but we're going to go with that. All right, also, he is going to reappear way down the road, right? Down in Shang Chi. So quite some time before we see him again, but there it goes off the page because he will return. Okay, how about Captain America the Winter Soldier? When does this happen? Well, first of all, it has a connection with Agent Carter's one-shot because it's the next appearance of Peggy Carter. And then also Nick Fury and other like Natasha shows up from Avengers, etc. So some of the members of Avengers show up, and some of the members of Shield, in particular Sitwell, show up. So very cool. Got some nice connections. Okay, when does it happen? Well, Captain America says he's 95 years old in The Winter Soldier because he says, "I'm 95. I'm not dead." Okay, so he's 95. Well, when was he born? Well, remember a long time ago, it feels like, a year ago, at least, when this video started, we talked about the fact that he showed us this past from when he joined the military. Well, it has his birthday, July 4th, of course. It had to be July 4th, right? But of 1918. So he's 95 years old. So that means this movie has to happen sometime between July of 2013 and July of 2014. So we have at least a time frame, right? Okay. So there is a date that's visible. Look in the upper left-hand corner, and you'll see 10/12 of 2013 on that computer monitor there. Well, could be, right? I mean, it's really small, and it's very brief, and you got to pause and look really close. But again, I'm fearing that they may look at the dates, but we're going to see that that doesn't really work. But anyway, that is in the movie. So full disclosure. Notice I'm trying to give facts that work and facts that don't work because I want you to have everything. Okay. It does seem more like it's 2014 because if you look on the gravestone, you can see the little peak of a 4 there, 2114, it seems. So that would lend itself towards that. Then I know I said I won't do this very often, but I do sometimes have to look at Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. in particular because anybody that watched season 1 of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. knows that it firmly ties in with Winter Soldier, such a massive crossover. So it's mentioned at the beginning of season 2 that all winter, the people were chasing after the agents after the whole fallout of Hydra. So for it to have been evading them for all of winter means this needs to be early. It needs to be in 2014. We saw that from the gravestone, but early in 2014. So I'm going to go with January of 2014. Now, the movie was released in April of 2014. I'm not going to be surprised if the timeline book goes with April. That would be unfortunate, though, because that would mean it's ignoring Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and that will make a lot of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. fans upset. We'll see. But I'm going to stick with January because that makes sense with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. as well as it does fit overall. It doesn't really feel like a January movie, though. It does feel more like an April when you watch it. But anyway, nonetheless, there you go. Okay, we're going to see everybody going forward then, ultimately into Age of Ultron, all the Avengers. And also, we're going to see from Thor the Dark World that Sif and the Warriors 3 show up, remember, giving the ether to the Collector. And, of course, the Collector is going to show up in Guardians Volume 1. So now we move to the next page. All right, speaking of, let's talk about Guardians 1. So when does this thing happen? Boy, they did not make this one real easy, but we can get close. Okay, so obviously there's the connection with the Collector, who now reappears after having appeared at the end of Thor the Dark World. Okay, so Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, we do know it's in 2014, so yay, right? Because they have a flashback to Earth of 1988 when Star-Lord is captured, and it's 26 years later. All right, that's helpful. So then we also know it's 2014 because in Endgame, they go back to 2014. So absolutely it's 2014 for Guardians 1. That's about all we have. They really don't give us much more. So let's look at Guardians 2 because we're going to take a couple of these all together because it's the best way to place them all. So Guardians 2 is also in 2014 because we have a flashback to 1980 and they tell us it jumps forward 34 years. And then James Gunn is a loose cannon. However, I'm going to use his tweets when they help us. And in this case, this does help us because he says, I can't believe how many people have asked me this. Guys, a pregnancy is only 9 months, and she, Meredith, could have already been pregnant at the start of Volume 2. That's important because we know that Star-Lord is kidnapped in 1988, and we're going to see, in fact, let's look, we're going to see in Guardians 3 that he was 8 when he was kidnapped. Remember, I was 8 years old when I left Earth, okay? So if he's 8 when he's kidnapped in 1988 and they're pregnant in 1980, then Gunn is right. It makes sense that she would already be pregnant in the beginning of 2 when they're meeting, when Ego and Meredith are meeting. So, okay. Then to make this work, though, it's got to be 8 months-ish after the beginning. So we're now talking Guardians 2 being probably in an October timeframe. Okay. Whew. Now, how much time between the two movies? I just put multiple quotes here so you can see it's kind of all over the place. The first movie takes place 2 months after the movie ends, then 2 months, then just a few months, then just a few months, and then 3 months later. Okay, we can take all of these and try to come up with something. So if we say Guardians 2 is in October, because we know he's 8, right? We know he's been in 1988, and we know he's just born in 1980. So you can put all this together. Then we know they're a couple months apart. Okay, what else do we know about I Am Groot? Because we're going to put all this in at once. We know that Guardians 1, he's in the flower pot. I Am Groot episode 1, he breaks out of the flower pot. Guardians 2, he's dancing. And then the rest of I Am Groot takes place after because we see the Benatar and they're in the Ravager's ship. Okay, so what do we do with all of this? I'm going to go with August of 2014. We're going to go with the first episode in September and then throughout November, and Guardians 2 in October. Because we're putting together everything we know. We're putting together that there's a few months in between Guardians 1 and 2. We're putting together the whole thing about when he was kidnapped, how old he was, all that. So if you don't agree, let me know. That's perfectly fine, but this is the best we can really do, and I applaud the wiki for coming up with something when Gunn didn't really give us the months. All right, how about Age of Ultron? So everybody remember all the Avengers now appear in Age of Ultron, okay? So when does that happen? Well, there's a couple interesting statements. First of all, Thor says the Mind Stone is the 4th of the Infinity Stones to show up in the last few years. It is interesting he says that, because I'm not sure how he knew about 4. I mean, basically, he knew about the Mind Stone, he knew about the Space Stone, and he knew about the Ether, the Reality Stone. I don't know how he knew about the Power Stone. Granted, the Power Stone was discovered in 2014, but he must be psychic because he had no idea about that. But nonetheless, that interesting little potential faux pas aside, this is saying it's been a few years since Avengers, right? So a few normally is 3 because a couple is 2. So anyway. This kind of places us in a 2015 timeframe. Great. Also, we know that Age of Ultron takes place during summer. Why do we know that? Because in Civil War, Tony mentions that this young kid decided to spend his summer in Sokovia, and of course didn't make it out. So it has to be sometime during summer. It can be early summer, which May is early summer, so that's still open, but it needs to be before summer ends. So he was killed in the Battle of Sokovia in Age of Ultron sometime during summer. Okay, great. Now, I really like these WHIH news fronts. They're still out there until X/Twitter disappears, but they were doing lots of live tweeting. And in particular, they live tweeted on July 8th of 2015 that they're going to have an in-depth look at the aftermath of the attacks on Sokovia. So therefore, we know all of Age of Ultron has to happen prior to July 8th of 2015, because that's when that tweet came out. Okay, that works. We also know Age of Ultron takes place over a year before Civil War, because in Civil War, which is in 2016, we'll get to that in a minute, Zemo says, "I've thought about nothing else for over a year." Okay, so it has to be over a year before 2016. And then this is kind of interesting, another little Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. thing. We learn that Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., episode 20, which is, by the way, when the helicarriers are found and given and used theoretically in Age of Ultron. I realize some people don't believe Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is still canon, but they do find the helicarriers in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Well, episode 20, when that happens, is 1 year after season 2, episode 1, and we learned that earlier was in April. So, we're looking around an April-May timeframe here. Okay. So if you put all that together, that it's got to be a few years after Avengers, that it seems to be around an April to May timeframe, needs to be a year before Civil War, April to May of 2015 works really well. Okay, great. That's where we get that. So then we have Ant-Man. So when does Ant-Man happen? And of course, Ant-Man has a tie to Avengers because he's going to show up and run into Falcon. So, okay, great. When does this happen? Well, this one, we also get some really helpful stuff from the WHIH Twitter. On July 10th of 2015, they tweeted out the footage of his 2012 break-in at VistaCorp. You remember where he liberated their funds and redistributed them. So, okay, they're basically saying it was 3 years ago that happened. Great. So we know that. Then we know that Scott was in prison, right, for 3 years. So that all fits together perfect. That it was 3 years ago, he says, that I was in prison and I know how to punch. I've been in prison for 3 years. I know how to punch. Okay, great. Then there's a Wired insider interview, which we see on the WHIH Twitter again, with Darren Cross. And Darren Cross is saying that some astonishing new venture is going to debut this week. Of course, what's he talking about? Well, the PIM technologies. So this week seems to imply that the movie doesn't have a very long time span, because this week would be, later in July. Okay, sounds good. What else do we know? Well, again, he says that they plan on PIM Tech unveiling a new venture this summer, I think. So the other one said within a week. Here he's saying this summer. Okay, great. The WHH newscast also puts the release of Scott from prison as July 17th. The case of former VistaCorp employee and cyber criminal Scott Lang, who's set to be released from federal prison on July 17th. Okay, we got that date. Perfect. And then again, we get a news ticker from WHIH. Notice there's Christine Everhart. PIM Technology CEO Darren Cross says astonishing new venture coming this week. Okay, great. And then you might say, okay, all the WHIH stuff, though, is it canon? Is it not? I don't know. Again, I think it was at the time, so it's very helpful with placing these things. But even in the movie, they're implying, hey, I can have cash here in 2 weeks. So Mitchell Carson's basically saying, we're ready to go. We're ready to go. So it seems really clear this movie does not encompass a very long span of time. At least that's what it appears to me. And then, of course, we mentioned Ant-Man takes place after Age of Ultron because of the Avengers headquarters battle. Here's the real problem, though. And this will be interesting to see what the timeline book does with it. It's a little hard to read. It doesn't show up for long, but there is a date on the phone at the end of the movie that's kind of flying around in the helicopter of October. Boy, my guess is this is not meant to be when the movie takes place and was just the date that happened to be on the phone. But nonetheless, you could argue, is it October? But we saw so much other evidence, both from WHIH, but also from the movie itself, that the movie does not span much time. So, does not seem like this movie goes into but a little bit of August at the most. So I'm going with that. It'll be interesting to see how the timeline book handles that date on the phone. Again, my fear is the timeline book is going to go with stuff that you can visually see and not so much the narrative. I am more a believer in the narrative wins every time. What makes the most sense in the story is where you got to go. So, July to August 2015. That's what I'm going with. Okay, how about Civil War? We've mentioned Civil War a couple times now. It's good to finally get it on the map here. So it connects with several of the Avengers who are appearing after Age of Ultron, and of course Ant-Man appears. So, okay, great. So, Civil War may take place from March to April because there is a newspaper that has a March date on it. That's pretty clear, right? And then at the end, epic Stan Lee cameo, but at the end, his FedEx box, at one point, he holds it so you can see it a little better, and it does have, in a couple different places, an April date. So that would imply the movie starts in March with the battle in Lagos with Crossbones, and then ends in April. So, again, if they go with what you can visually see, they're going to place this movie March to April. I do kind of like going with WHIH a little better on Twitter /X. Says May 3rd of 2016. May 3rd is the beginning of the movie, the Battle of Lagos. So if you go with that, and then the fact that the rest of the movie is a month after, because notice they say in Lagos, Nigeria, last month, so a month has gone by in the movie, that would put it in May to June. I like June better because that's going to fit so much better with all the movies that happen after Civil War. So we'll just have to see what the timeline book goes with. I'm going with May to June. So does the wiki. I like that. What's really cool about Civil War is whether or not you believe it's March to April or May to June, boy, is there a lot of cool stuff that places it for sure in 2016. So Civil War is 5 years after The Incredible Hulk, because Ross talks about his heart attack. 5 years ago, I had a heart attack. It's 4 years after The Avengers, because for the last 4 years, you've operated with unlimited power. It's 2 years after Winter Soldier. Aren't you the same woman who told the government to kiss her butt a few years ago? It's also 2 years after Winter Soldier because, hey, we looked for the guy, Bucky, for 2 years. And it's 1 year after Age of Ultron. I made a mention of this earlier, but he says, I've thought about nothing else for over a year. Wow. So it really, really solidly places itself in 2016 and places the dates of so many other things. But I got to mention, because I mentioned the facts that go against my placements as well as the ones that help it. Again, here is Vision with his infamous 8 years since Mr. Stark announced himself as Iron Man. So anyway, that line doesn't work with being Iron Man in 2009. And I'm going to bet they're going to go with 2008 in the timeline book, but I'm going to stick with 2009. Okay, so love how Civil War fits with all that stuff. Okay, the fallout from Civil War. Boom. Every one of these movies deals with the fallout. I love it. But part of what has made people feel like Phase 4 is a little disconnected, whereas Phase 3 was so connected, is stuff like this. I mean, it was just everything tied together perfectly. But I think we're going to see that Phase 4 is a lot more connected than we thought. So anyway, just interesting to note. But all right, let's look at each of these. Okay. Oh, also, you have, so we're going to talk about Black Panther first. And of course, you have Claw showing up in Avengers Age of Ultron and then in Black Panther. So that's why that connection appeared there. All right, so Black Panther. Black Panther takes place a week after Civil War because he's watching a newscast where literally they're talking about his father dying, which happened at the United Nations a week ago. Very sad. So this one's easy to place because the movie itself then spans around a month. So June to July of 2016. So great. Black Widow. How about Black Widow? That one's really clear that it's in 2016 because we get a flashback to 1995 and then forward 21 years later. So again, we know it's 2016 and the epilogue is 2 weeks later. And that's 2 weeks later after the end of Civil War. And we know the Civil War is in June, I believe at least. So that's why all of Black Widow is taking place in June of 2016. So perfect. Then what about Homecoming? Well, Homecoming also picks up right after Civil War, with him literally going home after Civil War and the uncomfortable hug that wasn't really a hug, but him reaching for the door. I love that. All right, so it picks up right after Civil War and then jumps 2 months forward. And it jumps 2 months forward to September. So that really works good. In fact, this is a reason why I think Civil War has to be in June, because otherwise this 2 months later won't work. Now, granted, it is Homecoming, which has all kinds of messed up stuff. I get that. But this seems to work. September, and then 2 months for the beginning. And then also, this is a close-up of one of the props. I realize, again, it's a prop. But nonetheless, notice it does have a Homecoming dance date of September 23rd. So that's cool. So I think this works really good being in June and September of 2016. You got to mention, right? Because I'm mentioning the stuff that doesn't work. 8 years later, obviously, is wrong. So wrong. So horrifically wrong. Obviously, it's only 4 years. But nonetheless, just showing you this stuff that they didn't get right. And then this one is interesting. I mentioned this earlier, but I'll bring it up again. Happy says, I've been carrying this, meaning engagement ring, since 2008, which would again imply that Iron Man is in 2008, not 2009. But really, he could have been carrying the ring even before the movie. It just does kind of fit better if once Stark kind of got interested in Pepper, looked at her a different way, if you will, that he got the engagement ring. So do with it what you will, but there's twice that the number 8 appears in a date in a Homecoming, and it's questionable. All right. Anyway, how about Ant-Man and the Wasp? Okay, when does this happen? Well, first of all, Ant-Man's been on home detention for 2 years since Civil War. Now, this gets tricky because we're talking home detention, and home detention, it should be exactly 2 years. That's the way the law works, not a day before. However, he should get some time served for being on the raft. In fact, I would give him double or triple time served because that was a terrible prison for someone to have to go to. Anyway, it is important to note we're talking 2 years after Civil War. Okay, great. So, in fact, he says, are my 2 years up already? So we know he's been in detention for 2 years since Civil War. We know it's happening. In fact, we know the blip is happening in 2018 because Hawkeye officially tells us, beyond a shadow of a doubt, 2018. Boom. We know it's 2018. Okay, great. So 2018. What else do we know? Well, I hate to do this, but what else can we do? So there's a laptop at one point that shows up when he's at home, And in the lower right-hand corner, and I'm going to zoom in, but it doesn't help. In fact, it's almost easier to see there. That kind of looks like 4/30 of 2018. I'm going to zoom in, but ugh, it just looks terrible. So I don't know whether you're supposed to see this or not. Sometimes they want you to see a date, like back in that Captain Marvel with the calendar, June 1995. I don't know whether we were supposed to see this or not, but it works. It's April. So, okay, the movie does seem to span a bit of time, especially with the epilogue when they got blipped. So, all right, April to May of 2018. We'll see what the timeline book goes with. This one was hard to place for sure, but we know it's 2018, and we know it's right before Infinity War. Okay, how about Doctor Strange? Doctor Strange is another interesting one. They do give us some really helpful things. At the beginning of the movie, we see his watch, and it's really clear. I mean, they zoom in on it, and you can tell it's February 2nd of 2016. All right, great. So that's the beginning of the movie. Also, it fits well with him receiving an award in 2016, because we see that in the movie. All right, great. Then the ending of the movie is in winter due to the snow. A wonderful scene there with him and the Ancient One. But so we know it's at least wintertime, which in New York is many, many months, right? All right, so also Avengers Endgame helps us place the end of Doctor Strange because they go back in time to May of 2012, and the Ancient One says you're about 5 years too early to see Doctor Strange, which would mean, the end of the movie is therefore sometime prior to May of 2017. So it works good with late 2016, early 2017. So we're going to go with February 2016 to January of 2017 for that placement. All right, then we have Thor Ragnarok. Thor Ragnarok obviously picks up with Doctor Strange appearing, and it tells us what on earth both Thor and Hulk have been up to. So they've been gone for about 2 years since Age of Ultron because Thor says Sokovia, Ultron, that was 2 years ago. Also, Bruce says, maybe the fact that I was trapped for 2 years as the Hulk, he goes on to say. So clearly it's 2 years after Age of Ultron. But when does it happen? So that would be in 2017. We know that. But when does it happen in 2017? Well, the clothing, is appropriate for a fall time frame. Okay, that works. And then also, we can look to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. For another hint here, because Season 5, Episode 11 does refer to the Thor movie, Ragnarok, and they say an Asgardian was spotted in the city. So that's sometime before December. So yeah, November of 2017 works really well. Okay, that's it for Thor. That fits really good. Okay, now we go to Infinity War. Man, everything gets connected, right? All the Avengers reappear, which is great. Captain Marvel, remember she was way back on the previous slide. The Guardians show up, and then anybody who hasn't shown up in their own movie now shows up from Civil War. So yeah, everybody connects together into Infinity War. So when does this thing happen? Well, they give us a lot of good indications. It was 6 years after Avengers, which Avengers is in 2012, because he says Thanos has been inside my head for 6 years. We know that it's 2 years after Civil War, because Vision says for 2 years we've stolen these moments. We also know it's 2 years after Civil War, because Rhodey said, wow, you guys really look like crap. Must have been a rough couple years, and couple again is 2. All right, great. We also see that leaves are forming on the trees, so that would make us think, a spring time frame. Okay, great. We also know school year is in session because Peter Parker is in school. And we will eventually learn from Far From Home that Betty implies it was during semester 2 that this happened. So in the second semester, because she says, even though we blipped halfway through the school year, we had already taken midterms. So you put all that together and you get a nice solid May of 2018, because it also has to be after Ant-Man and the Wasp. So it has to be before school ends in June, but after Ant-Man and the Wasp's ending in May. So awesome. May of 2018. That works. Okay, so Avengers Infinity War is then going to connect onto our next image. And then also, we still haven't had poor Trevor reappear yet, the Mandarin, so he's got to carry over. All right, so then we move in. So now we have Avengers Endgame. So when does this thing take place? Well, we know it jumps forward 5 years, right? Because they tell us 5 years later. We learn in Endgame that the 2014 Thanos is told that Nebula is 9 years in the future. So 2023 Nebula is 9 years from 2014 because Ebony Maw says 9 years in the future. Okay, great. Then Miss Marvel actually gives us the date in an Easter egg. So on this really cool memorial from episode 1 of Miss Marvel, if you zoom in, so I've got it circled there in the corner. If you can read it without being zoomed, great. But if you zoom in, it's a little blurry, but it gives us 2 dates, actually. They vanished in spring of 2018. We saw that, right? And they returned in October of 2023. It's worth noting, by the way, I wish it had been a clean 5 years, but it's not. So when you try to figure out people's ages, if they were blipped, they were gone not for 5 years, but like kind of 5 years and 5 months. So, oy vey, I have no idea how they figure out what people's ages are in the MCU anymore. So, yuck. I'm just going to round everything to 5 years, but it is not 5 years. Interesting. Okay, so there you go, man. Avengers Endgame, very easy to place, October of 2023. All right, I do want to mention, and this is going to come up later, why this is important. I feel it was so catastrophic that more than half the universe was probably killed. Let's take just Earth, for example, where they do talk about half of the population was gone. And I do know a lot of people have said Thanos didn't wipe out an equal half from every single planet. I only know that in the MCU, they keep saying half of all life was wiped out. So we're just going to go with half. But here's the thing. I think more than half. Because notice, look at these explosions happening. I mean, whoever was in that helicopter, if you remember at the end of Infinity War, they're dead. They weren't blipped. They're just dead if they were in there. But then think about it. Anybody on an airplane, when the pilot blipped, that plane's going down. Anybody riding in a car, when the driver, blipped, gone. What if someone was doing surgery? What if someone was riding on a bus? What if someone was in a train, where the conductor was gone? Also, drug manufacturing would have been hurt. Half the doctors might have been gone. Oil workers, people working in food plants. I mean, it was a disaster after the blip and trying to live in that time frame. So not only do I think there were a lot of fallout deaths as a result of the blip, there was also a lot of industries that had to be shut down until they could get them up and running again because, a bunch of the workers were gone. Not necessarily half of everyone from every single factory, but maybe key people from each factory or oil plant or whatever. All right. Plus, we do see during Endgame how bad things are. I mean, look at the Statue of Liberty with all those boats just docked around it, abandoned. Look at the football field with all the cars just left there for 5 years and 5 months. Look at the support groups that were out there. So it was a disaster. We'll see why that's important, but I just really want to stress it. Marvel kind of just seemed to move on like, oh, everything's fine. It wasn't fine. And we're going to see that it really is a lot worse than we might have ever guessed. Also in Endgame, I think this is fascinating. When Steve says, I saw a pod of whales and Black Widow says in the Hudson. And he says, well, there's fewer ships. I mean, there were actually whales that felt safe swimming around the Hudson. You would never see a whale if things were even close to operational. So, yeah, I think Endgame makes it clear things were a disaster. But I think if you just look logically at the fallout from the blip, it was terrible. It was just terrible. Also, take Torres's word, right? He wasn't blipped. And he says, basically, the Flag Smashers, think that the world was better during the blip. Trust me, it wasn't. So it was a terrible 5 years. And then everybody returns and it creates chaos. So anyway, I'm just bringing that up now because it's going to come up as we look at Phase 4. All right, so now let's talk about Loki. There's not much to say. I mean, Season 2 is coming out. Maybe we're going to get more of an answer, but I'm just putting that it's outside of time, that he was pulled from the 2012 time heist to the end of time, I guess. We just don't know. It looks like with the time slipping, we're now seeing that time does exist in the TVA, but we got to wait and find out. All right, and then we got What If, which seems to be possible only because of the death of He Who Remains. It's all over the multiverse, so I'm just putting multiverse, and there's really not much more to do with that. But WandaVision, we can place this one really clearly. So Director Hayward says it's been 3 weeks since the blip. So, in fact, he says to Monica, it's been 3 weeks and you're the first to report. Okay, great. Also, we see in episode 7 of WandaVision that there's a calendar that if you look at the days, perfectly matches November of 2023. And this calendar is very important because that heart is when the blip was created, or the hex, when the hex was created. So yeah, that sure looks like November of 2023. Very cool. So I think it's pretty easy to place WandaVision in November of 2023, a few weeks after everybody returned from Endgame. Okay, and obviously we have the connection with Loki because it sure seems like the reason she was hearing the children's voices in the epilogue was because of the multiverse. She was hearing them from across the multiverse, which we learned in Multiverse of Madness. All right, so I'm going to jump to Falcon and the Winter Soldier for now because this is really important because this is the closest we've seen to the fallout from the blip in the MCU. So first of all, we know Sam has been with the Air Force for 6 months. He says, I've been working with the Air Force for 6 months now. Great. Also, as far into the series as episode 4, they keep talking about 6 months because he basically says the Global Repatriation Council promised to send us more teachers, supplies. That was 6 months ago. So seemingly 6 months after the return, we're already up to episode 4, and it's been only 6 months after. The reason this is important is when the Dora Milaje appears, they don't mention T'Challa's death. It seems very likely they would because T'Challa meant so much to Bucky. In fact, all of Wakanda did. So it seems like we're still at a point where that hasn't happened yet. And we will learn when we get to placing Wakanda Forever that T'Challa dies in May of 2024 because the movie skips forward to May of 2025 for the main body of the movie. So seemingly up to this point, Falcon and the Winter Soldier is not up to May. But then with the last few episodes, it does creep into May after that Dora Milaje appearance. So April to May of 2024 works really good. What I really like about Falcon and the Winter Soldier is it helps us understand how bad the world was a full 6 months after the blip. Look at some of these quotes. A few months ago, billions of people reappeared after 5 years away, sending the world into turmoil. Turmoil. And then Torres says they're trying to take advantage of all the chaos and make some money, referring to many of the people taking advantage of the chaos that is still 6 months after the blip. There's still 6 months and there's chaos enough that people are trying to take advantage. Rhodes says the world's a crazy place right now. Well, Rhodes / maybe Rava, right? Rava. We'll see. Anyway, allies are now enemies. Alliances are all torn apart. The world's broken. Okay. Whether we can trust his quotes or not, we'll have to wait and see. But nonetheless, man on the TV, a reporter, says unrest in the wake of recent events has left us vulnerable. Okay? The world is upside down, Bucky says. U.S. agent, I almost called him Wyatt. That's the actor's name. Says, yeah, the GRC, they're doing the best they can to get things up and running smoothly post-blip. The best they can to get things up and running 6 months afterwards, right? Reactivating citizenship, Social Security, healthcare. Not everybody has healthcare again, or Social Security, or even citizenship. Yikes. Then this is very important. They still have not moved people back to their countries of origin because they're saying they would move upwards of 20 million refugees back home to their countries of origin. And then they're talking about the settlements that happened 5 years ago. They still exist. They still exist. And then the Patch Act. This is very important because it would seek to restore traditional world border regulations. So basically the borders of the world had not been reset up until now. Wow. I mean, that is just a mess. Why is all of that important? Because that is why you're going to see that I do not place Eternals, Shang Chi, Thor: Love and Thunder, or Moon Knight in early 2024. I think they're all later in 2024 or even 2025. These are the few places where I disagree with the wiki. I agree with the wiki on Moon Knight, but on Eternals, Shang-Chi, and Thor: Love and Thunder, I just want to be clear, my date is different than the wikis because I don't want you to think the wiki says something it doesn't. So we'll talk about each of those, but I just wanted you to see the world is an absolute mess 6 months after the blip. So what can we place? Well, Far From Home, that's what we can place. So let's look at Far From Home. So the movie starts at the end of the school year because they say it's the last day of school. We're good. Then Betty says the blip was over 5 years ago. She says over 5 years ago, all of half of life in the universe, vanished. Then she says 8 months ago, a band of brave heroes basically brought everyone back. So that helps us a lot. Also, we do learn that even 8 months after the blip, there's still people displaced because they're doing this fundraiser to help the homeless. Thank you for coming out to support those who have been displaced by the blip. All right. So one interesting thing, and this is going to be a recurring theme, is that Marvel kind of ignores when real life events happen because the movie features the Signal Festival or the Festival of Lights in Prague, which is October of 2024 normally. It should be in October of 2024. Instead, clearly Far From Home is during their summer vacation, clearly. So they're ignoring when it actually happens in real life, and that's fine, but it's not the first time they're going to ignore cultural events. So what do we do with all this? Well, the most important thing is it's 8 months after Endgame, and it's the end of the school year, which conveniently helps us place, Endgame in October again. That's awesome. That's perfect. And this movie is starting in June and going into July over their spring summer break. All right, Shang Chi. Again, we're going to see that Shang Chi on the wiki is placed earlier, but I place it here, and let's look at why. Okay. Oh, and also finally Trevor. Hey, Trevor. Remember we left him way long time ago. He's finally appearing in Shang-Chi. So yay. All right. So why does the wiki place it where it does? Well, the movie is pretty crystal clear, and so I see why the wiki does it. The Talo portal only opens during the Qingming Festival. So notice they say it down there. It only opens once a year. Okay. When does this thing happen? Well, the Qingming Festival, unlike many traditional Chinese festivals that fall on different dates, the Tomb Sweeping Day, which is another name for it, is the same every year. Most Chinese festivals follow the lunar calendar, but Tomb Sweeping Day always falls on April 4th or 5th. The holiday falls on the 107th day after the start of winter. So this seems really clear. They're saying it's scheduled to be in April 4th or 5th and the 107th day after the start of winter. Couldn't be much more clear, could it? And so it should therefore be in April 4th to 5th of 2024 when the main part of the movie is happening, when Talos portal is opened. In fact, look, there's a calendar. It's very hard for you to see, but it's got a 4 in it, which would make us think April. But more importantly, it's got spring flowers. That seems springy. Also, there's Spring's Top Talent magazine. That seems to say April, right? A good time frame would work good. And then there's mail that was received, quote, a few months ago, and it's post-dated 12/04. So December 4th. Okay. All of this, because a few months ago from December would be April, right? So all of this seems to indicate very clearly that the writer of this movie wanted it to be in April. But here's a big question. Would international travel be easy in April? Remember, we learned earlier that the GRC formally began drafting legislation known as the Patch Act, which would seek to restore traditional border regulations. Let me tell you what, if suddenly borders are being restored around the country, international travel would be extremely difficult. And what do they do a lot of in Shang-Chi's movie? International travel, like a lot of it. And they make it look extremely easy. So that would be a strike against it happening around an April timeframe in the MCU. So when does it seem like Marvel wants it to happen? Well, again, well after the blip and well after things have been restored in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So there's this Shang-Chi bus fight, and in it we see an advertisement for a July timing. That's a pretty weak reason to go with it, but it is true. The camera really does hang on that during this scene. Multiple times we see it. Okay. I mean, July certainly works better than April, but that would mean it's another time when Marvel has shown a disinterest in when actual festival dates happen. We covered the Festival of Lights on the left, and we're going to soon cover the Eid festivals, which they also ignore. So, okay, I want to be clear. I think the movie absolutely was meant to take place in April, but I do not think it works in the MCU taking place in April. But here's also something interesting. Captain Marvel's hair growth. So at the end of Endgame, which is October of 2023, we know that. Look, she's got very short hair, and granted, it's fluffed up, but still, it's pretty short. Yet, when she appears in the post-credit scene, which is either in March, April, time frame of 2024, or July, which is what I'm guessing, then it's really long. The average hair growth is about an inch per month or 6 inches per year. It looks to me like that's 6 inches of growth, not just a few months. So, I mean, it's a small thing, but I think narratively speaking, Shang-Chi works way better in July timeframe, and then just little things like this, it just makes it fit better. So I'm going with July. It could even be later. Could even be August, because that bus poster could have been like a month old. But yeah, I think it's good for this to clear Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the borders issue, and for Captain Marvel's hair to have grown out a little longer. Okay, how about Eternals? Boy, another controversial one. Okay, well, by the way, Eternals, we're going to see, has a GRC Easter egg, so that's why it connects with Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Okay, in fact, speaking of, there it is, right? Welcome back. We can help. Now, my first thought was, this right here is enough to say there's no way this movie is taking place in 2023, because the government doesn't move that fast, and there's no way the government could suddenly have an advertisement up for the GRC just a few weeks after the return of everybody. But it is possible that the government could move that fast. Probably a bigger issue is all the advertising. This just, to me, does not look like the world's demolished and in terrible shape. This looks like business as usual. But nonetheless, let's talk about the GRC, because in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, they say, 6 months ago, would you have imagined people supporting the cause like this? But they also say the Global Repatriation Council promised to send more teachers and supplies, and that was 6 months ago. So that implies the GRC did exist right after the blip. I am stunned, but I think it appears they were there. So the GRC advertisement doesn't really mean that the Eternals needs to take place later in the timeline. I originally thought that was a good reason for it. I more think, again, the fact that it looked like life was just pretty normal in that scene. But okay, let's talk then a little bit more about this placement and try to figure this thing out. So again, everybody seems pretty happy and normal. I think that's kind of weird. But if you look at the clothing, it's clearly fall clothing, right? And we even see the pumpkin in the lower left there on a bench. So yeah, clearly the movie is happening around an October or November timeframe. Okay, so we got that. Also, clearly, Ajax's quote works best in 2023. Because she says, 5 years ago, Thanos erased half the population of the universe, delayed the emergence, but the people of this planet brought everyone back with a snap of a finger. It really seems clear that this movie was meant to be in 2023. However, it goes back to the question of, narratively speaking, does it work in the MCU? Well, there are some little hints. I think the fact that Sprite refers to Steve Rogers as Captain Rogers and not Captain America, I think she's doing that because Sam Wilson is now Captain America. Just a guess, but I think that really fits because she says, so now that Captain Rogers and Iron Man are both gone, she calls him Iron Man, but Captain Rogers. Okay, maybe. That could maybe imply that it's after Falcon and the Winter Soldier. But again, and I alluded to this earlier, I think we have to look at the death count as a result of the blip beyond just half the universe vanishing. And notice here, and I did a whole video on this, you can go into the gory details in that, but I think, sure, Thanos' snap wiped out half the world. But then you had additional deaths that happened on that day because the pilot of an airplane vanished and the whole airplane crashed. I think you have follow-on deaths that happened because there was a lack of doctors, there's a lack of food production, etc. You may or may not have had COVID deaths, if COVID even happened. It maybe didn't. I don't think you had many babies being born because babies were born. There was a big baby boom after World War II, but really during World War II, it was scary. So then when the world population came back again, I think we actually had less people. Here's my point. We had less people when Tony Stark returned half the people back because he only returned the ones that were blipped. I think it took another year before we finally got up to a number that could allow the emergence to occur. So that's just my opinion, but that's why I really feel like a 2024 date makes sense. So I like October of 2024 for Eternals. Again, Wiki, October 2023. Place it whenever you feel best. That is my guess, and we'll see what the timeline book has to say. All right, No Way Home. Let's look at No Way Home. When does that happen? No Way Home obviously has Wong appear, so that's Wong's next appearance, and obviously the multiverse had a big impact on No Way Home, so we got to have that connection in there. Okay, so we do get a new Asgard, a political turmoil Easter egg, and this is basically 9 months after the blip. That really kind of fits with what a mess the world is, right? That even New Asgard was a mess. Okay, great. So we got that. Then it sure looks like No Way Home is happening in October after October because of the Halloween decorations. They talk about you need to take those down. And so after that is when the main body of the movie happens with the fight with Doctor Strange. Notice the leaves are all falling. And then the epilogue of the movie is in December. So great. I think the movie covers from July, picking up right after Far From Home, until December of 2024. Beautiful. All right. How about Multiverse of Madness? The Multiverse of Madness, of course, connects with No Way Home, and the multiverse clearly played a big role in all the craziness that happened, and Wanda appears, so that's her next appearance. All right, when does this thing happen? Well, I think it happens during the body of No Way Home. What I mean by that is you have the fight in No Way Home, with Doctor Strange there. And then notice in Multiverse of Madness, the leaves on the trees look almost exactly the same. So I think as soon as that happened, you then go into Multiverse of Madness, also in November, and then you go to that final scene with Peter Parker swinging over New York. So also, this is interesting. If you're questioning whether it's really happening in November, Doctor Strange's watch, which amazingly still works, it's cracked, but it still works. Look at that date on there, November. So you can see it says October and then November on there. So the movie seems to indicate also November. So I really think this makes sense to be November. But again, I want to stress it's kind of weird. The end of No Way Home happens actually after the end of Multiverse of Madness. But it's just one scene of him swinging over New York at Christmas time. Okay, how about Hawkeye? When does Hawkeye happen? Well, they really help us with this one. I mean, they really help us. You can see on the wall there in Kate's apartment is the holiday party, and it's dated December 24th of 2024. Excellent. Also, Kate won a fencing tournament in 2024, which means it has to happen at least in 2024, if not later than that. But again, the holiday party is in December of 2024. So no reason to look any further. December of 2024. Perfect. Okay, how about Thor? This is another one of those controversial placements. So let's look at when this happens. First of all, I think Jane was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer 6 months prior to the main part of the movie, which is in May, and we'll get to that. But so therefore, she was diagnosed in November of 2024. The reason I struggle with this, therefore, happening in 2023 is that means she basically came back from the blip and immediately was diagnosed with cancer. It could work. I'm not saying it couldn't work, but we're going to see that it could get a little tricky if that's the timing. All right, so then I believe, and the wiki also believes, that February, after Jane was diagnosed with cancer, is when Gore takes his vow. Wiki places it in 2024. I place it in 2025. But his vow of all gods must die, we're talking around February 2025. Then in April, because they give us the date, it's really clear, Jane takes her final blood test. So whether you put it in 24 or 25, it's April. Then I believe the main team up, the main part of the movie is in May with the Guardians. Then he meets Jane in May. He meets Eternity. Then at the end of the movie, then we have the little post-credit scene with him and Love jumping into action. And then here's the real key. I think the entire movie is being retold by Korg in October of 2025. So that's really weird, but literally the entire movie is a flashback. Okay, great. It works. Now, here's why I think these placements work. So first of all, Thor helps place the moment of the breakup when he says it's 8 years, 7 months, and 6 days ago. And it's that time frame before the main part of the movie in May. So that places us in October of 2016. Does that work if it's in October of 2016? Well, yeah, I think it does. We just know he has to be gone during Civil War. And Civil War is May to June of 2016 because they said, do you know where Thor or Banner are right now? They don't. So he was off-world searching for the stones. And then after easily a year of searching for them, he came back, and that's really where their relationship fell apart, to be honest. It was him being gone and Jane being really famous. Okay, and remember, we even saw during those flashbacks that he was leaving Earth off and on with Heimdall. So I think he was trying to salvage the relationship, and it fell apart. And even Doctor Strange didn't know how to reach him. Isn't that funny? In Ragnarok, he says, and you don't have a phone or an email, as they discuss. So, yeah, no one could reach Thor, even the Avengers, let alone Doctor Strange. So, yeah, I think he was off-world, back and forth, came back, and they broke up. All right, and by the way, this places the breakup closer to Ragnarok in November of 2017. So I think that works. Okay, great. Because remember that they're saying, sorry to hear Jane dumped you. Okay. Now, in Spider-Man No Way Home, there was an Easter egg that we talked about earlier from July of 2024 about political turmoil. That's another reason I think Love and Thunder is in 2025, because they were still having trouble in July of 2024. There was all kinds of turmoil. Some of that could have been because of the blip and just the mess. So therefore, I think it would take a while after the blip for tourism to blossom. This is what it looked like in October 2023, right after Endgame, on the left, right? This is what it looks like in Love and Thunder. So you go from deserted to 3 cruise ships. Number one, I can't imagine people going on cruises right before all the turmoil we saw in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I don't think it makes sense. I don't think the world had recovered enough that people were going on these type of cruises, and I don't think Asgard was ready for them anyway. I think this makes much more sense in 2025. Thor needed time to get his god bod back, definitely, doing his workouts. Okay, I alluded to this earlier. I think WandaVision and Darcy was so tied up in Westview, she couldn't have been there for Jane when Jane discovered she had cancer. I just think it makes more sense for Jane to discover the cancer at the end of 2024 instead of right after Endgame. And then there's a question of how long has Jane been Mighty Thor? It's not crystal clear, but if we look at the clues, when Thor arrives in New Asgard, Jane is an established member of the community, so she's been there for a little while. Jane's had enough time to try a lot of different catchphrases. She and Valkyrie have had time to become close friends, but Jane describes Gore as her first bad guy. Valkyrie tells Thor saving lives she's good at, but she's only been Thor for a minute, quote unquote. So you kind of put all that together, and it seems like it hasn't been long that she's been in New Asgard and been basically the Mighty Thor. The weather seems really chilly, so a spring setting could work, although I think in Norway it's chilly all the time. And then, by the way, this scene that they showed in the trailers, it never actually appeared in the movie. So this looks really vivid and green, but it never is in the movie. So I'm just bringing that up in case people might remember that, because it didn't actually occur. Okay, does April of 2025, here's the bottom line, does April of 2025 work better than April of 2024 for Jane finding out she has cancer? All right, the reason I like 2025 better than 2024, to summarize all that, is it gives space between Love and Thunder and WandaVision, which we talked about. It places Love and Thunder after the political turmoil that we saw in July of 2024. It allows time for tourism to bloom. It allows Thor to get in shape. It places the Love and Thunder movie closer to the Lady Thor reference that we're going to see soon in She-Hulk. And it places the breakup closer to Thor Ragnarok. So I just think there's a ton of reasons that it works better in 2025. We'll see, right? But let's talk about why it doesn't work. Groot's growth patterns are a mess. So here we see him in Guardians 2. Here we see him in Infinity War. Then he was blipped, so he's gone for 5 years. But then we see him still a teenager in Love and Thunder. And then this giant monster in the holiday special, which we haven't got to that yet in the timeline, but trust me, he's huge. But it is important to note that Kraglin refers to Groot as just a kid. He says, oh, Groot, he's just a kid. So no matter how giant he is, he's still considered a kid. Then we see in Guardians 3, he really hasn't changed much. And then he goes massive at the end credit scene. Somebody try to explain all this to me? I don't know. I mean, his growth patterns are, maybe he can control them himself. They seem to be sporadic. Maybe when he's flooded with energy, that gives him more growth. I don't know. Bottom line is, it does seem weird he was still a teenager if Love and Thunder is in May of 2025, but nothing about his growth makes sense. So I think Thor goes from February to October of 2025. So we'll see where the timeline book places it, but that's what I feel. Okay, Moon Knight. Moon Knight has a connection with Falcon and the Winter Soldier because there's a GRC Easter egg, but otherwise doesn't really connect with much. In fact, there's the Easter egg, so we know it's post-Endgame, probably post-Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but we really don't even know that, honestly. Okay, so how do we place this thing? Well, we see that there is a current exhibit at the museum that goes from April 22nd to July 29th. So seemingly it's happening sometime during this museum exhibit. Also, Stephen early on says that basically that's the wrong number of gods that they have out there. And instead of 7, it should be 9. One would think, since he's very smart and understands Egyptian stuff very, very well, he wouldn't come in near the end of the exhibit and go, hey, by the way, it's been wrong for 2 months or 3 months. He would come at the beginning and say, hey, it's wrong. So that seems to place early April timeframe. Also, spring works really well. There's a lot of flowers that are in bloom in different parts of the episodes. So, okay, that works good for spring. Then this is really cool. In the wiki, they have this information, which just helps you think stuff through. At the end of the goldfish problem, which is an episode, a waxing crescent moon is shown on the day after what is said to be Sunday, placing the waxing crescent on Monday. This aligns with the lunar phase on Monday, April 28th of 2025, as this would place the episode early into the exhibit. Remember, we talked about early in the exhibit run, and only a few days prior to a waxing crescent, technically not aligning exactly, but still pretty close. We'll see in just a second what they mean by that. So working backwards, this would place the first scene featuring the exhibit on Thursday, April 24th of 2025, the earliest date it can possibly occur. And then in the friendly type, another episode, the sun is shown to have not yet risen in Cairo at 6 a.m., suggesting that the series should ideally be set earlier in the year, again, supporting the idea that this is earlier in the exhibit rather than later. So whatever you think about all that, I really like the fact that they're basically saying it makes more sense in April than later. Okay, why do I bring all this up? Because some people place it in June of 2024, because if you look at the phases of the moon, they align perfectly with what is shown in the series with a June of 2024 calendar. They also align decently with April and May of 2025, but not as well, because we really should see the waxing crescent on the 28th, and we don't. But here's the bottom line. The whole reason people started talking about the moon is because the director of the series said that he had a placement in mind, but it doesn't matter anymore because Marvel didn't seem to go with it. I'm paraphrasing him, but that's basically what he said. So a lot of people were like, oh, well, let's figure out what he originally wanted it to be. And that's why it looks like a June of 2024. But the bottom line is, narratively speaking, it works way better and makes so much more sense in April of 2025. So even if you believe the moon phases determine when it should happen, I don't think April is a terrible fit. It still works. But other things like being the beginning of the exhibit when Stephen would complain about it makes so much more sense. So April to May of 2025 is what we're going with for that. All right, so Wakanda Forever. It's the first appearance of everybody since Wakanda Forever, obviously, or since Endgame, sorry. And then, of course, other than the Dora Milaje, who did make an appearance in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Okay, so the main part of the movie is 1 year after T'Challa's death, which, we saw. And again, I mentioned how it makes so much sense for the Dora Milaje appearing in Falcon and the Winter Soldier to be before T'Challa died. So, therefore, since they don't mention his death in May of 2024 from Falcon and the Winter Soldier, it seems like he died after those episodes. Okay, but why May? Here's the big thing. A deleted scene. Daggone it. Stop deleting scenes with dates, Marvel. Darn it. But this seems to show the intent of the movie. And notice it has a May 7th date of 2025. So that would seem to imply this is around the time that is a year later from T'Challa's death. So he died in May of 2024, and the main movie is happening in May of 2025. But there's some other things that fit really well. We know Riri Williams is a student at MIT. So does May fit? Well, if we look at the academic school year from 2024 to 2025, it ends on May 13th. So yes, she could still be in classes if it's early May. What else is kind of cool? Well, she says it was a couple months ago that she built the detector, so it works well with her being later in the school year because that means she built it earlier in the school year. But even more important, she says, I've got differential equations class in like 15 minutes. Well, when does differential equations take place at MIT? Well, this is really cool. It is only offered in the spring. Okay, boy, that's just a ton of hints that this has to happen in May of 2025. Also, the weather seems appropriate for May in Virginia when Ross is out jogging. So, what about Nakia? Boy, this is kind of crazy because she says she left Wakanda 6 years ago. It's been 6 years since she left us, they tell her. And Okoye says, after Thanos' attack, when you left without saying a word, it hurt. So we know that she stayed at least until Thanos' attack, but then she left. But she says, when he was taken away from me, meaning T'Challa, just like that, I had to step away. Okay, and then at the end of the movie, we learn we agreed it was better for him to grow up here, referring to T'Challa's young son, Toussaint, away from the pressure of the throne. So we learn a lot of pieces of the timeline, but what I think, and also he says he didn't want us to go to the funeral. That's important. Don't go to the funeral. But so the script kind of ties all these pieces together. I know it's just the script and it has some lines that didn't appear in the movie, but still, this is really cool to just check this out for just a second here. Nakia says, when I left Wakanda after the blip, I came here and found out I was with child. I had him and raised him here. When everybody came back, T'Challa came here secretly. We agreed to continue to raise him here and to introduce him to Wakanda when the time was right. But we didn't want the choice to be made for us. T'Challa prepared for his death, but forbade me from attending the funeral in Wakanda out of fear of exposing him. We had our own rituals for him here. So this really ties it all together. Nakia didn't know she was necessarily pregnant yet, but she left Wakanda right after he died, which means that they probably conceived their child right before the blip. She then found out she was pregnant when she got to Haiti, decided not to come back, and I love that T'Challa got a chance to come and meet his son before he died. So very cool. All really fits well. Then a couple last things. There is a few little Easter eggs with Scott Lang's book tour, which we'll cover a little more when we get to Quantumania. His autobiography, Look Out for the Little Guy. And then this is kind of cool. So now things are seemingly going pretty well between New Asgard and the U.S. because Ritson signs a trade pact with New Asgard. And so this is in 2025 May timeframe. Very cool. Woof. All right. Wakanda Forever. That's fun, huh? Okay, how about She-Hulk? Now, She-Hulk has the most connections to anything else out there. It's crazy. So we're going to see there's a mention of Lady Thor, which is Jane. We're going to see that there's an Easter egg about Eternals, which is cool. We will see that Blonsky appears, and he last appeared in Shang Chi. We'll see a mention of Rogers the Musical, which appeared in Hawkeye. We'll see a mention to the spell, a memory spell from No Way Home, and we're going to see Wong appear, and he last appeared in Multiverse of Madness. My goodness. Way to go, She-Hulk. Okay, so I mentioned the Eternals reference. Sure enough, there we go. A giant statue sticking out of the ocean. Then the Shang-Chi / Blonsky connection. This one was really confusing when the show came out, but it does kind of make sense. So if you just take this real quick here, we have Hulk's injury. Notice he's got his arm sling on, and that's after Endgame. Then we have the cage fight between Blonsky and Wong, which is seen in Shang-Chi, which I'm placing in July of 2024. Also in the end credit scene, we see the Banner is still using the inhibitor on his arm, and he has a broken arm. Then, we haven't placed it yet, but the episode number 1, which is a flashback with Bruce and Jen training to be a Hulk, notice he's still got the inhibitor. And then, of course, it comes off, and she gets his blood mixed with her, and she becomes She-Hulk. So in episode 2, then, when we finally see the footage from this cage fight, I mean, it's obviously like many, many months later, but how does that work? Well, the theory I've got, and maybe they'll cover this in the timeline book, or maybe they're just going to let us headcanon this, but it was an illegal fight club. So probably anybody videoing something there wasn't releasing it, or maybe on the dark web they released it, but it wasn't publicly released. However, when suddenly Blonsky's up for parole, and now he's being mentioned on the news, somebody went, hey, wait, I got footage of this dude from a cage fight months ago. And that's when it got leaked to the press. So I really do think this works. But a lot of people want to place She-Hulk back around the time frame of Shang-Chi's movie. I don't think it's necessary. But boy, was it confusing when they did it that way. Oy. All right. Episode 8 has a Rogers the Musical reference, as I alluded to, with Hawkeye. In fact, this is Hawkeye's performance that we saw of it, and there's all the posters up for Hawkeye. Now, typically, keep in mind, these things debut in New York before they go somewhere else. That's important. And then here, in fact, we see in No Way Home, where they're swinging through, there's a Rogers the Musical sign up there. So that's cool. Nice little tie-in. Also, though, out in L.A., we see a poster for Rogers the Musical. So the reason I think this places She-Hulk firmly in 2025 after Hawkeye is I don't think it would have opened in L.A. first. It's not impossible, but it doesn't really make sense. It seems like it would open in New York first and then in LA. So I think this helps place She-Hulk in 2025. Then episode 3 has the No Way Home memory spell reference I alluded to, where Wong says, I'm not erasing everyone's memories, not again. It's very messy, believe me. So you might say, well, how does that mean it has to be after No Way Home? Well, because in No Way Home, when they talked about the memory spell, that was his face. He didn't remember it having been cast before. And Doctor Strange was like, yeah, that's because it worked. You didn't remember it. So it seems like that was, as far as Wong knew, it had never been cast before. So then when he shows up in She-Hulk and starts talking about it, that's because it's after it was cast in No Way Home. So I think in No Way Home, he had no idea the spell even existed or had ever been cast. And then in She-Hulk, now he's referring to No Way Home. So that's why he's saying in No Way Home, be careful, keep me out of it. So anyway, I think firmly this places, once again, She-Hulk in 2025 because it's after the No Way Home spell. And then also, if you look at Wong's journey to Sorcerer Supreme, he was a Target salesman, then a librarian at Kamar-Taj for 11 years, and then finally was Sorcerer Supreme. And you can see that in his outfit because he's wearing his librarian outfit in Doctor Strange, Infinity War, Shang Chi, and No Way Home. He then leaves, heads to Kamar-Taj. I believe that's when he was appointed Sorcerer Supreme officially. I mean, he was training in Shang Chi, obviously, to be Sorcerer Supreme combat, but he was officially made Sorcerer Supreme in Multiverse of Madness. So they were referring to him as Sorcerer Supreme, but he was not official. He didn't get his garb until Multiverse of Madness. So therefore, when he shows up in She-Hulk, that's why I think it has to be chronologically after No Way Home, or he would have been wearing it in No Way Home. So I think his outfit chronology really makes She-Hulk fit in 2025. Also, I don't think there's any way that Blonsky wouldn't have helped with the battle in Multiverse of Madness if he'd been at Kamar-Taj, because he got invited, remember, at the end of She-Hulk to come to Kamar-Taj. He would have helped. I don't think he was there. It would have been kind of cool to see him fight, but he would have been, blown away by Wanda as well, I suspect. All right, finally. So that's why I think with all these things, it has to be in 2025. So then let's try to place it in 2025. When does it happen? Well, we know episode 1 is a flashback that happened a few months ago. We know from a chalkboard in episode 1 that someone had written something happened in November 4th. It looks pretty recent because it hasn't been erased. So theoretically, episode 1 is not too long after November 4th. October. 10/4 is October. All right. Of course, episode 1 shows Jennifer Walters getting the blood, turning into She-Hulk, getting her training. Spandex, right? You got to learn about spandex. Episode 4 happens shortly after late January because this one of her dates, her goofy dates, talks about his movie premiering at Sundance, and that's in January. So, I mean, it could have been several months after, but he says just premiered, so not too long ago. Episode 4, however, occurs before summer because notice her schedule. She talks about summer interviews. Okay, so after January, but before summer. Episode 6 needs to cover enough time for that wedding, although I do really think, if you watch it closely, I think it was a spur-of-the-moment wedding. I mean, she was not expecting it. There aren't many people at the wedding, so this was not something where you're invited like 6-7 months in advance. It was probably like a month because it was out of nowhere. And then episode 9 indicates that episode 8 occurs in mid-August, which we see because of the event instigator being 8/16, and this is referring to episode 8 and the craziness at that awards ceremony. So you put all that together. Oh, and by the way, episode 9 has to be after May because they reference Lady Thor, which was from Love and Thunder. So I think She-Hulk occurs from May to August of 2025, with that flashback being earlier, probably more like a January, February timeframe. Woof. But I love it. I love how She-Hulk really fits in with all this stuff, and I think it really is perfect in May to August of 2025. Okay, how about Miss Marvel? So Miss Marvel has a tie to She-Hulk, which we're going to see in a second, because on the wall of damage control, we actually see the villains from She-Hulk on the wall. It's pretty wild. It also ties with Shang Chi because I do believe the bangles and the 10 rings are going to have some ties together. And in fact, we saw the reference to the 10 rings in the flashbacks. So, okay, I mentioned that Miss Marvel seems to happen after She-Hulk because on the wall in Damage Control, look at the different villains there. You can see Titania, Mr. Immortal. So pretty cool. It's blink and you miss it. You got to pause and zoom, but still, it sure looks like Miss Marvel's happening after She-Hulk. Miss Marvel has the little Easter egg of Scott Lang's podcast, which is really cool. It also mentions Scott and Hope's vacation, so that's kind of cool. Then this is the only time in Phase 4 that I have seen a physical date appearing. If anybody else knows of one, let me know. But they don't really show the year. I think Marvel has been trying to hide that because it is confusing to the general population, not timeline wonks like us that watch these long videos. But the general population couldn't care less what year these are happening. So if they hear this stuff is in 2025, 2026, it will just confuse them. So for the most part, they don't do it. But here they did. So we know it's in 2025. Miss Marvel is definitely in 2025 because of this street vendor sanitation grade. Also, boy, more blink and you miss it, but Kamala's driver's ed car registration ends in December of 2025. So, okay, great. So when does this happen in 2025, right? Well, the easy answer, very easy answer, is that it's during the second Eid, because they mention that this is the lesser Eid, which they're joking about that. But anyway, that's in June 6th to 7th in the year of 2025. So you go, oh, well, that's easy. We placed it, right? Well, there's a problem. It sure seems like the beginning of Kamala's junior year. Look at all these things. So we know she's in her junior year. College admissions are coming. They haven't happened yet. They hadn't taken the SAT yet. Kamran is transferring in. That normally happens at the beginning of a school year, not the end. There's posters for a homecoming queen. The student president voting, there's posters for that. There's posters saying this fall, fight the flu. She's attending a guidance session, which you wouldn't think she would do in June because the school year is almost over. And we see leaves in several scenes, or where she falls out of the window in a pile of leaves. Oy vey, my goodness. So again, this looks like Marvel is ignoring when an actual cultural event is happening, and instead, this seems to be the beginning of her junior year. Okay, so that means September, and then it runs over easily a month. So September to October 2025. That's the third time they've ignored when a cultural event happens. Very, very bizarre. Okay, Werewolf by Night. When does this happen? Boy, we sure don't know much. We know it happens after 2012's Avengers, so it's in Phase 4 at least. It's in after Phase 1. And that doesn't tell us much. So I'm going to place it in a Phase 4 for now, but let's see what we can get here. Okay, so we know that Ulysses Bloodstone died on the last full moon. In fact, this translation, if you on the left there, says, Ulysses, son of Septimus Bloodstone, was slain on the last full moon of the year and the end of the bloodshed. Okay, so last full moon of the year. Well, let's just say that it was the last full moon of the year in 2025. What would that mean? Well, the last full moon is on December 4th of 2025. And then we learn in the special that the next full moon is in 5 days. So the next full moon is January 3rd, and 5 days before that would set the special presentation in December 29th of 2025. So that would mean that there's only 25 days between his death and the funeral. Having unfortunately planned funerals for a couple family members, I can tell you that's a short time frame. You can do it, but it's a short time frame. So let's look at what would happen if Ulysses died on the last full moon of 2024. Well, the last full moon of 2024 is December 15th of 2024. In the special, again, it talks about the next full moon being in 5 days. That's November 5th. And then look at how perfect this is. 5 days before November 5th is October 31st. I mean, of course Marvel would want a Halloween special on Halloween, right? But that's quite a long time between his death and the funeral. Now, while I do think the other time frame was too short, this is pretty lengthy. But let's look and see if this makes sense. Well, first of all, the October time frame works well because Jack wears Dia de los Muertos face markings, which you normally wear around Halloween time frame. Now, he also might have been honoring his ancestors and wearing them on other time frames than just the Day of the Dead time frame, but still, nonetheless, this seems to work with October. But could they possibly have had a funeral, 8, 9 months, 10 months later? Well, they are well versed in taxidermy. We saw that in the episode, right? Or in the special presentation. Lots of taxidermy going on. So Ulysses' corpse could be taxidermied. Also, it was animated. That would take some time to animate it. They had to hollow him out and put in all the animatronics. We know the coffin device was complex and was dusty because dust poofed out of it. So it's been inactive for a while. We know they had to get all the hunters together. They had to capture Man-Thing. And so you put all that together. I think it could have taken a long time between when he died and when the funeral was. I like October 31st. We'll see what the timeline book says, but I really like that time frame. It just works perfectly. Okay, Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special. I mean, this one's pretty easy, right? I mean, it's clearly Christmas. It doesn't get much Christmassier than this. And then I'm going to go with the James Gunn tweet. I can't believe I'm doing it, but there's just not much else to go off of to know what year this happened. He said, although the holiday special is a standalone story, it contains a lot of fun facts about what the Guardians have been up to for all these years. Well, it doesn't seem like he would say for all these years if it had been in 2024, because it's only been a year. So, because we saw him in Endgame, right? We know what they were up to. So, okay, I kind of like, therefore, 2025. I think this tweet kind of says it, but, who knows? I'm going to go with December 2025, and so does the wiki. Okay, Quantumania. When does this thing occur? Well, number one, it ties to Loki because of Kang. It ties to Miss Marvel because of all the references to Scott and his book tour and his podcasts and all kinds of things. The book tour was actually mentioned in Wakanda Forever. The podcasts were mentioned in Miss Marvel. So it kind of ties to both of those loosely because it keeps mentioning what they've been up to. Okay, so in fact, let's talk about those Easter eggs, right? Wakanda Forever had the book tour Easter egg. Look out for the little guy. So we knew he was doing his book tour in May of 2025. Okay, that's helpful. And we see him talking about his book in Quantumania. So is this part of the book tour or not? Well, my guess is no, because this looks like it's at his local library, and they don't mention book tour anywhere there. They just say book reading. So this doesn't necessarily have to be part of his book tour. It could be, but it doesn't say that it is. It looks more like a book reading in a library. So just kind of keep that in mind, because we're going to see it's going to be an awfully long time for his book tour based on when I believe this movie is placed. All right, so from a month standpoint, they really make it easy. July 24th, right? And we had to really zoom in to see this, but a high-res zoom lets us see July 24th. Excellent. Also, in the epilogue, Scott's injuries have somewhat healed, right? You can see his injuries at the end of Quantumania in the quantum realm, and then you can see them in the post-credit scenes. So it seems like the movie mostly takes place in July and then skips forward a little bit. Oh boy, what do you do with Cassie, though? Cassie says her age is 6 in the first Ant-Man, because she says, Dad, a guy dressed like a bee tried to kill me in my room when I was 6. Okay, well, let's look at this. So she's talking about when she got attacked by Yellow Jacket. She's saying she was 6. Well, we do know Scott placed her age at 10 in Ant-Man and the Wasp, because he said, hey, you try and entertain a 10-year-old. Okay, could she be 6 in Ant-Man and 10 in Ant-Man and the Wasp? Not really. But maybe Peyton Reed started retconning things, because in a quote, Peyton Reed said, Cassie's now 18, so she was 6 in the first movie and 9 in the second. Wait, she was 9 in the second? Because it says she was 10. So I don't know. I don't know what Peyton Reed was doing here. I don't know what ages she's supposed to be. All I know is this. We definitely saw in Ant-Man that her birthday was at the beginning of the movie. And as I discussed in the timeline placement, the movie takes place in July and August timeframe. So she was born in July. Okay, how do we make this work where she's 6 in Ant-Man, 9 in Ant-Man and the Wasp, and then 18 in Quantumania? Well, maybe when she said she was 6, she wasn't referring to, or she forgot that was after her birthday when Yellow Jacket attacked her. So she just made a mistake, and she should have said 7, because technically, if her birthday was in July, Yellow Jacket attacked her after her birthday. So, okay. It's trickier, though, with Ant-Man. Ant-Man didn't know his own daughter's age. Really? He said she was 10, and she didn't even correct him? Peyton, you're frustrating me, man. But it does work with her being 18 in 2026. Okay, I, yeah, really don't like this. I'm hoping the timeline book tries to explain this a little better. We'll see. But nonetheless, I think this is how her age worked. Are we sure she's 18 though, or was maybe Peyton wrong about that? No, she really does seem to be 18 in the movie because she's in a county jail. She's in the San Francisco County Jail, and you don't go in there as a child. If you were a minor, you'd be sent home. She has to be 18 because she was literally in a cell with adults, both male and female. So yeah, she's 18. Here's the only thing that really seems to solidify the Quantumania is in 2026 rather than 2025. Is Scott says it's a few years ago for Endgame. It's been a crazy few years for everyone. Well, a few normally means three because a couple is two. A few can mean two, but it makes more sense to mean three. So I think it makes sense for Quantumania to be in July of 2026. That puts it a few years after Endgame. It does let Cassie be 18. Her age is pretty messed up, as we saw. Oi. That's all I can say. Oi. So we'll see what the timeline book does, but I'm going to go July of 2026. And for now, that is what the wiki is doing as well. All right. How about Guardians of the Galaxy? This one's a little simpler. They don't really give us a lot, to be honest. There's a line early on that's a little confusing. It seems like a timeline clue, but it's really not. They're talking about Star-Lord being so sad that Gamora has died. He's been pretty mopey ever since Gamora died. And then Nebula's like, no, she's not dead. She just doesn't remember anything from the past few years. So at first I thought, oh, well, this is saying it's been a few years since Endgame. No, Nebula would know that what she doesn't remember, quote unquote, what Gamora doesn't remember is everything from 2014 when she jumped out of the timeline to 2023. She basically did not experience 9 years in the MCU. This is not referring to how long the movie is after Endgame. So that's just interesting. I just want to point that out. This is not a timeline clue. It's really telling us. In fact, it's weird she says doesn't remember. It's not so much that. It's she didn't even experience 9 years of the MCU. But anyway, just bringing that up. More importantly is this quote, James Gunn, anyway, and Twitter. You never know what you're going to get. But he says, I don't imagine the Guardians were with Thor for 2 years. So he does not like my Love and Thunder placement of Thor, of the movie. I get that. But he does say, it feels like there's been a couple of years between Endgame and Volume 3. Okay, so at least two. At least two. All right. What about the trees and other greenery? Does that help us? Maybe. I mean, it's hard to tell. Is this spring or is this fall? It could be either. It could be the trees are losing their leaves and they've just done a good job raking them up, or it could be the leaves are starting to come. Again, here we got some green stuff and we got some trees that are barren. It could be the green stuff is evergreen stuff, though, right? That's green throughout the year. What I think really helps is this newspaper. There's a couple articles. Number one is this article, Alien Abduction, Kevin Bacon's Shares All. So that's obviously referring to the holiday special when they abducted him. And it would make sense that this could be several months afterwards because probably Kevin Bacon spent a while trying to figure out, do I even want to talk about what happened or not? And then he wanted to sell his story. And then finally it trickled down to the St. Charles Post. So, okay, we know it's after that and it could be any amount of months after. This other article, though, that you can barely see, if you zoom and enhance, this is really helpful. Bad weather won't keep the public at bay. Festival to continue. So what is a St. Charles festival that it is big enough and most important enough that the paper would write about it? Well, there is actually a festival of the Little Hills. And this festival, and this article is about the 2023 festival, but notice, held annually on the third full week of August, the St. Charles mainstay commemorates the city's founding, that's pretty important, by inviting more than 350,000 people for a 3-day celebration. So the festival could be referring to lots of festivals, I agree. But the fact they didn't give the name really means it's got to be a pretty famous festival. And this one sure fits the bill. So this is in the third full week of August. So therefore, my thought is the Guardians of the Galaxy, the ending scene there is in late August. And since most of the movie covers a pretty short amount of time, August of 2026, that works. All right. What about Secret Invasion? When does this happen? Well, first, let's look at the connections. This is obviously the first appearance that we've seen of Nick Fury, because Far From Home, that wasn't Nick Fury. It is the next appearance of Ross, who appeared in Wakanda Forever. And, that line's ugly. Look at that thing. Yoink. Yikes. That's the next appearance of Talos. Okay, so when does this thing happen? Well, we know the show is 30 years after Captain Marvel, which is in June of 1995, because Prescott says it started 30 years ago when the Skrulls found Earth. Now, technically speaking, the Skrulls found Earth well before 1995. I mean, they found them maybe in Earth in 1989, maybe even before that. But what Prescott is referring to is when, the government definitely knew about them, when Nick Fury met them, etc. Because he says Carol Danvers and Nick Fury promised to find them a new planet, which obviously happened more around the June 1995 timeframe. All right, so also, Fury says it's been 30 years that he's had hands-on experience with the Skrulls. And then Hill says, your lack of contact over the past few years sent a pretty clear message. So now we're talking about the amount of time between Endgame and Secret Invasion. A few normally means 3 because a couple is 2. So this might mean 3 years after Endgame. I think even more clear is Talos saying, and it's too heavy here, man. I got to go up to my space station. You've been up there for years. So that sure doesn't seem like only 2. That seems more like 3 or more. Then Fury even says that he's been cleaning up messes for 30-some years. I've been cleaning up your poop for the last 30-some years. So that would imply potentially more than 30 years. So we have the thing about a few years after Endgame and 30-some years after 1995. We also learn the attack, which is one of the main events of the show, is planned for tomorrow, Unity Day. Now, Unity Day is November 4th. It's a Russian holiday. And assuming that this is, a cultural event that Marvel is actually acknowledging the right day, then we know it's November. So it's November, and it's clearly several years after Endgame. All right. Also, we do see what looks like fall foliage, with the trees having lost their leaves, etc. And then we have Ritson's speech. This is really important in deciding where in the MCU to place Secret Invasion. He says, I'm going to create a bill that designates all off-world born species as enemy combatants, and we will kill every last one of you. So he's pretty clear. So it really feels like Secret Invasion has to happen after scenes, like this, where Drax and Mantis during the holiday special are just hanging out and people are taking pictures with them. Now, I've heard some people say, well, maybe they thought they were cosplaying and just wanted a fun picture. I mean, maybe their costumes look really, really good if they're cosplaying. Plus, just even being near an alien could get you shot. Even if you're not going to try to shoot them, you may get shot by somebody else seeing them. I mean, literally, if this is in December of 2025 and Ritson is in November of 2025 saying, kill all aliens, we're within a month of him doing that edict. There's no way. There's just no way they're hanging out. But on the off chance that these people thought they were cosplaying, then they go to a bar, remember? And they're dancing and singing and hanging out. People would realize this is not a costume. They are actual aliens. And then there's the police. The police, can get trigger happy, especially when the President of the United States says to kill all aliens. And instead they're saying, I don't know what you're doing here, but you need to back up or I'll shoot. So sure seems to me like these things would not make sense if Ritson had just made that edict. And then I know this is a smaller thing, but still, Star-Lord coming home probably wouldn't be talking about mowing the lawn or not. Instead would be saying, why did the president say to kill all my friends if they come back to Earth? So I think all of these things mean Secret Invasion has to happen after both the holiday special and Guardians 3. And so therefore, I think an October to November timeframe works really well in 2026 because it puts it after a Guardians 3, after the holiday special, and that is a few years after Endgame, and at least 30 years after 1995. I will say, though, I am a little worried because that means the Marvels has to be after Secret Invasion, and then we got this crazy quote that just came out. So it was in Total Film, but I don't have access to their website, but Screen Rant quoted this, and basically they said that Kamala is still a 16-year-old girl in the Marvels. She was 16 in Miss Marvel. Well, there's no way she's still 16 if the Marvels is happening after Secret Invasion. She would be at least 17. So I'm kind of hoping that quote's just wrong. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. For now, I'm not worried about it. But yeah, I hope this isn't another Cassie's Age where it takes us, like a mathematical degree to figure out how it all works. Anyway, there we go. That is the timeline for the MCU up to this point. Every movie and TV show in the main MCU. Also, I'm going to go ahead and move the 2026 stuff, there we go, to a new image because there's just too much here. So this is basically Phase 4, and then here's Phase 5. And then just to kind of summarize it all, you got Phase 1 and a little bit of 2, 2, and then most of 3, or all of 3. No, most of 3. And then 4. And then 5. So yeah, it's all there. I'm going to put it out on my Google Drive. I will leave a pinned comment that tells you how to get to that, and you can download this image if you're interested. It also has the Excel spreadsheet, the Google spreadsheet, I should say, that has all the dates for everything. Really cool. Feel free to download that and do whatever you want with it. Also, don't forget, we do have the contest throughout all of August. Be a subscriber and leave a comment, and you'll be entered. And then we also, of course, have the Discord, which I always mention. Here we are talking about the timeline. And if you'd like to join that, I will leave also in the pinned comment a link to join. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we can all continue to enjoy the ever-growing, ever-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe.